Welcome to a Skewed Chimp.
In a recent video, I did a lot of practicing at roughing out this piece of red pine. It was really kind of liberating for me to be able to get in there and just play around with a piece of wood that I didn't have any attachment to, that I didn't care about whether or not I finished a project or how it turned out or anything, to just go in there and mess around with the tools. I also learned a surprising amount from that exercise, and as a result, I wanted to make this video both to share what I had learned as well as to encourage others, either new or experienced, not to overlook the value of just messing around with practice pieces. It certainly got smaller. It went from about 8 inches around to about 5 inches around while I was trying to rough it out. Part of that was because I kept roughing it out even after it was round, just to keep practicing. I do eventually plan to finish roughing the entire thing until it's gone and just turning it into sawdust, but this is where I'm at right now. Now, this piece was particularly rough when I started. I mean, it even had like 2 branches that were coming out of it, and it was kind of misshapen, and it was big. It also had 2 knots right in this area that made it really difficult to work with, and even underneath the knots, like after the knots were gone, the gouge had a harder time grabbing onto something that it could slice off in this area as opposed to the rest of the wood. And because of that, I lost a lot of wood just trying to get it turned round. Another thing I learned is that as I'm sure a lot of new turners do, I found I had a tendency to push inward towards the center of the spindle as I was turning. And I also discovered that I'd do this instead of just letting the lathe and chisel do the work. So as I moved along, it would move in and out in a kind of a piston motion, and that of course just kept forcing me to take off yet more wood. I also think there might have been a safety issue here. If you look here and you see the crack, it was bigger because it was farther out from the center of the wood when I had started, and because I was turning at such a low RPM, 340 RPM, and pushing the tool inward, I could have very easily gotten a catch on this and really either ruined the project or myself or both. The lesson I got out of that is that you should just set the tool down and let it do the work, which I already knew, but it's different to feel it and it's different to experience it. I also learned that relaxing and letting the tool do the work would save me the problem of hand cramps, which I got from squeezing the tool too tightly. One of the other things I learned is when I was spinning this and I was getting the large pieces of bark off and stuff, I honestly have turned things before. You guys have seen me. I've done this before. But turning it, if you do it straight up and down, it's coming back largely towards your face. The things that come off of here are coming back up towards your face. If you do it like this, it is really coming at your face. But if you go like this and turn it away from you as you're moving, it shoots off a different direction. So aiming it a little bit away from myself instead of just keeping it straight up and down is probably a valuable trick to learn how to use. If I don't go like that, but instead I go like that, that'll help redirect the shards that are coming off, the shavings that are coming off. And also, I think that having the longer edge on this side, the up and down kind of crescent-shaped edge of the tool, might help with slicing as I move forward, as I move that direction. So there's that. I also learned that the initial piece, and I didn't even talk about this, the initial piece was 16 inches long. And eventually that was too much, because what would happen is I would start on one side, and then before I even got to the end of the piece of wood, I would run off the edge of the tool rest over here. And so the piece was too big for me to be practicing with that way. Now, maybe when I'm more skilled, that won't be such a limitation, but for right now it was. And so I kept running off the edge before I got to the end. I would run off the end of this before I ran off the end of this, and that just made it difficult and frustrating. It also contributed to the weight imbalances and to the amount of work that the lathe was doing. So everything was magnified because it was just so big at the time. So having a shorter one helped a lot. I cut it down to 6.5 inches on this portion. but having a smaller piece when you're practicing is really a good idea. Just one that fits along the tool rest would be fine. Oh, and so I learned kind of what to pay attention to when mounting it without a faceplate. So like if I can move this around, on this side, you can see that I had this overlapping lip here, right here. Let me get something so that I can point. So like here, you can see that there's a lip here, a big lip. And there was also a large one on the other side. And you can kind of see by looking at this that if I hold the pencil steady, you can see the line. Whoops, that ruined it. If I start, I'm off the line here, okay? And you can see the line that I'm drawing. It's very off balance. So the line disappears here, and it actually comes, the angle of the wood comes back this direction. So learning how to balance things that are not completely cylindrical is something that takes a little practice. Oh, I totally got used to the face shield now. And I think the face shield is better. I also have a pair of goggles. I have a pair of goggles that I wear, but sometimes. But the face shield is actually the better mousetrap. It's just not, I don't have it in front of me right now. But getting used to the face shield is better, for sure, no question. I had heard a lot of pretty horrible things about working with pine wood from other turners, and so I expected my tool to get dull very quickly. But as it turns out, that actually didn't happen. The tools held up pretty well. Now, I did notice the difference between dull tools and sharp tools, but the tools actually held up quite well and did not get all that dull on me. Another observation is that the RPM is super important. So as I got this thing kind of taken down to round, I should have been trying to speed up the RPM more quickly than I did. Like I was trying to get it completely round before I sped up the RPM, and that's probably not in my best interest. The faster it goes, the easier your life is. And it's funny because after doing this, I went and watched another video, and Mike Waltz said exactly that in his video, that the faster you go, the easier your life is going to be. And so that's true, definitely. And so as soon as one can possibly get their machine to not vibrate all over the place while turning it, they should probably try to speed up the RPM. Okay, and so I learned this. Like when I was having a couple of places where the tool was being rammed back towards me, like this, I found that finding even just one clear spot and then slowly going through the piece of wood helped a lot in minimizing those things. But if you stay in removing those spots that were causing me to gyrate, to piston out, whatever that word is, but if I went slowly, the slower I went, the easier it was to actually get those things taken out that were causing my chisel to go back and forth like this. So, yeah. The slower I went from side to side, the more quickly I was able to get it round. Now, at first I didn't know that, so I was just sitting there doing the piston thing back and forth all over the place. And it was not making a whole lot of progress for me. I did figure it out eventually, though. At least I think that's true, and we'll try it again next time. This is cool. I'm going to move this again. I've got a spur chuck in here, as you guys can see. Now, right before I started this, I actually greased this up quite a bit. So when I'm turning it, if for some reason this got caught on the spur chuck, it would still spin because I had this really well greased up, and so it would kind of act like a natural clutch. It's gotten a little dirty now, and I don't want to wreck it, but that is what happened. Now, I will say that on this side, in here, if you guys can see, you can't really see. that part has gotten pretty torn up. You can see it right in there. You can see that it's gotten kind of torn up in here. There's a hole in here. I don't know how well you guys will be able to see that on the video, but I did do quite a bit of damage to the butt end of this, but the spur chuck is probably not intended to be used as a finishing product, at least not that I can conceive of. So, yeah. But having the spur chuck really well lubricated really did help quite a lot. And so when I did have a jam or I was struggling to make good contact with the wood, it did act kind of as a natural clutch, just because it would allow the spur chuck to continue to spin. I don't want to yank on it right now, but well, besides the wood's been destroyed, this connection in the wood has been destroyed, but like the spur chuck turning was really helpful. So I was actually pretty glad for that. This thing, my chisel, got absolutely coated in pine tar. I mean, it got just coated in it. All I did is took a palm's worth of vegetable oil and I put it on here and let it sit for like, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds. And then I washed it off. And, that was it. So, people complain about pine tar gunking up their stuff. I got to tell you, it's not hard to clean off at all. All I did is used a little bit of corn oil, vegetable oil, I think specifically, and that was it. It took it right off and cleaned it up. It hasn't been this clean in a long time, actually, because then I used a little scrubby and soap and water to get the corn oil off. It took me like 2 minutes. So I used the corn oil, let it sit for 30 seconds. Then I took some dish soap and a Brillo pad and just really quickly went over it, and it was done. Probably less than 60 seconds. That's all the footage I've got. Maybe there's something to learn every time somebody takes time out to practice to refine their skills. And so I encourage that. I'm really glad I did it. I'm going to do it again. Now that I've done this one, I'll finish kind of destroying this piece. And then I'll give it a try and try some new stuff. But so I learned a lot of lessons from this, and practice is really worth it. And having pieces of wood that you don't plan to do anything with and that you're just going to throw in the trash really do help a lot.